Hey everybody, it's Taylor with the Daily again. Let's get into it. In the last episode, we talked about some executive orders that Joe Biden signed into office on his very first day as president. And in this episode, we're going to talk about one of those executive orders in particular. It is Executive Order 13992, and it talks about revoking some of the executive orders from the Trump administration. In particular, things about regulating the private sector and certain things about transparency of government. The first two we're going to talk about are Executive Order 13771 and Executive Order 13777. Both of these have to do with regulating the private sector. This is where Donald Trump signed an executive order that said for every one regulation you put on the private sector, you have to identify two that you're going to take off or repeal. And Executive Order 13777 enforces that. It makes a board of people that goes and makes sure that we are following this 1 for 2 rule. And also it makes sure that we go back through all of the existing regulations and make sure that they're not overly costing or outdated or inefficient, that type of thing. Now remember, we are revoking these two executive orders, so no longer do those rules apply. You can make as many regulations as you want now and not have to take any off according to the law. Joe Biden's order also revokes Executive Order 13875 from June of 2019, and this had to do with the amount of committees within the executive branch, or the amount of agencies, amount of people doing things, amount of groups formed, and it basically said that we have to eliminate 1/3 of all the agencies across the executive branch in order to reduce spending within the executive branch. And then it caps the amount of agencies that we can have at 350 total. Now remember, that's revoked, so that cap no longer exists. Executive Orders 13891 and 13892 were also revoked by Joe Biden. Now these two kind of work hand in hand and talk about the similar topics, and it's about protecting the private sector from government agencies, specifically within the executive branch. The executive branch government agencies issue guidance about legislation that comes out on how the private sector should respond to certain new laws that come out or regulations. And in no way can this guidance seem legally binding or make it feel like the private sector has to respond to this guidance and this guidance alone, when really the law or the thing that the legislative branch approved and the president signed into office is what governs the private sector. There were instances, I guess, of the government agencies making it seem like that their guidance was the only way to do something, or that their guidance was law and that they were abusing this power. And these two executive orders aimed at getting rid of that and making sure that the executive branch was being much more transparent about their guidance. The last one we're going to talk about is Executive Order 13893, and remember, this is also revoked. Now, Executive Order 13893 had to do with trying to reduce government spending inside the executive branch. And for every mandatory spending opportunity that the executive branch deemed was in fact mandatory, there had to be a proposal of at least one or more ways to reduce good discretionary spending in the administration or the administrative part of the executive branch. Normally I try to leave a lot of my opinions out of these videos in order to keep them as objective as possible and just tell you what's going on and what this thing is. But I do have to bring this up because of this whole message of bringing the country back together and unifying us once again, and how divisive everything is right now. And I have to preface with saying that I don't agree with a lot of the ways he conducted himself. I don't agree with a lot of his policies, but I am going to say everything that Donald Trump did was not inherently bad because he was Donald Trump. That is an extremist view, and I will fight you to the ends of the earth on saying that anyone has every idea that they have is just horrible because of who they are. That's just not true in every sense of the way. So with that being said, about this legislation, I agree with a lot of it, and they're pretty common sense statements. Looking back at efficiencies and making the executive branch more efficient, reducing spending as much as possible on superfluous things that just happen all the time and people go unchecked because that's just the way things are. That's the status quo. I totally agree with that. Going back and looking at the executive branch and making sure that we are being as efficient as possible, spending as least amount of tax dollars as we possibly can. That is a very common sense statement that I think anybody would agree with. Now, I get repealing the thing with the one regulation for two regulations. That rule makes not a lot of sense to me, because I think there's a lot of protections that the government has put into place to protect consumers, to protect the environment, a lot of protections that the government has put in place just in general for the betterment of the population. I did find it quite funny that in Executive Order 13891, which is one of the ones that was repealed by Joe Biden's executive order, it was very blatantly stated that the legislative branch of government is the only branch of government that can create laws. Yet here we are talking about executive orders, and they are exactly that. They are laws. The president can make laws, even though he clearly acknowledges, or at least Donald Trump did, acknowledge that the legislative branch is the only branch of government that can legislate the people or issue legislation. I thought that was kind of funny and obviously extremely hypocritical, because we treat executive orders like laws anyways. Anyways, with that, guys, I appreciate you watching. Have a good one. Follow me on Twitter. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. It's right here. Hit the subscribe button. I appreciate every single one of you, and have a great day.